The 6-year-old girl accidentally dropped a cup, her small foot scraped by the broken pieces, yet her stepmother scolded her harshly and forced her to press her face against the curtain as she sobbed. No one came to help her until her millionaire father unexpectedly returned home after a business trip. He stepped inside and shouted one sentence that left the entire house in complete silence. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell me which city you are watching from. Now, let's start the story. The afternoon in the Oak Ridge mansion was so quiet that the sound of the wind slipping through the glass windows could be heard. Inside, the polished living room reflected the hesitant steps of a little girl. It was Sophia Miller, a 6-year-old in a simple pale pink dress, her clear eyes always carrying a shadow of longing. Sophia's mother had died of illness when she was only 2, and the memory of her existed only in faint fragments. Since then, the greatest desire in Sophia's heart had been to have a mother to hold her, to hear gentle words of praise. Her father, Jonathan Miller, was a successful businessman, constantly away on business trips. 5 months earlier, he had remarried Victoria Blake, a young woman who once worked as a receptionist at his company. On the wedding day, Victoria carried a sweet appearance, always smiling at Sophia, even softly patting her head and calling her, "my sweet little girl." Innocently, Sophia believed that was the love she had always wished for. But when Jonathan was not home, that sweetness vanished. Victoria gradually revealed her bitter and cold nature, seeing Sophia as a burden, as a shadow of the late wife she wanted to erase. That afternoon, Sophia tried to do something very simple: wash a glass and carry it into the living room. She believed that if she behaved well and worked hard, maybe her stepmother would be pleased. Her small hands were still wet, and the glass slipped in a brief loss of control. The sharp sound of shattering filled the room, glass scattered across the tiled floor. One shard cut into Sophia's foot, and a thin line of red spread across the wound. Sophia panicked, dropped to her knees, clutching her foot, tears welling up. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The click of high heels struck the floor with chilling precision. Victoria appeared at the staircase, her tight red dress accentuating her haughty look, but her eyes were blazing with fury. The face carefully made up was now twisted in anger. Her shrill voice echoed through the room. "This house is no place for a clumsy little brat like you. Look at what you've done, Sophia. You're useless." Startled, Sophia hugged her foot tighter, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. She still tried to plead, her voice faint. "Please don't be mad. I'll pick it all up. I'll clean everything. I promise." Victoria stepped closer, never once glancing at the blood on the child's leg. She pointed straight at Sophia, her voice sharp. "Kalate. Sorry? Does saying sorry make the cup whole again? Useless girl. Always clumsy, always making me look bad. I told you to behave properly, but you keep acting out and then pretend to cry so your father will pity you. Pathetic child." Sophia trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She staggered to her feet, each small step dragging across the cold tile floor, leaving a trail of red behind her. The heavy curtain blocked the light, and in its shadow she pressed herself close, her shoulders shaking violently. Her sobs broke into gasps, tangled with fear and despair. In her tiny heart, Sophia kept telling herself, "If I were better, if I hadn't broken the cup, maybe Mama would love me." Sophia quickly shook her head, a tear sliding down her cheek as she whispered in a tiny voice, "I don't want Daddy to be upset. I just want you to be happy, Mama." Victoria folded her arms, her lips curling into a cold smile, her eyes fixed on the small trembling back. Her voice hissed again. "Happy? You think looking like this can win me over? Don't dream. A girl like you will always be a burden. Get up. Face the wall now." The little hand slipped away from her wound, trembling. Sophia staggered upright. The small cut made every step painful, each one leaving a damp, smudged mark on the floor. She walked slowly toward the thick curtain in the living room, pressing her face against it, her shoulders heaving with sobs. Her broken voice blended with her crying. "Please don't punish me today. My foot hurts so much. Please, Mama." Just then, the sound of the front door echoed through the house. Steady, heavy footsteps of a man carried down the hallway. A familiar voice, weary yet warm, called out, "Sophia, "Are you home?" Jonathan Miller had just returned from a long business trip. He was dressed in a dark suit, holding tightly to a brand new white teddy bear. It was the gift he had picked out at the airport, hoping to make up for the days he had been away. As he stepped into the living room, the sight before him froze his body. His daughter, small and trembling, was standing with her face pressed to the curtain, her foot covered with scratches. In front of her, Victoria, in a tight red dress, was pointing her finger, her face twisted with rage, her words of scolding still hanging in the air. Jonathan froze for a few seconds. The white teddy bear slipped from his hand, rolled onto the chair, as if the shock itself had knocked it away. His heart pounded, caught between anger and anguish. In that instant, he understood that everything he had tried to believe in all this time had collapsed. Without another thought, Jonathan rushed forward and pulled Sophia away from the curtain. Her tiny hand was ice cold, trembling. He bent down and saw her feet covered in scratches, each step leaving a damp mark on the floor. Jonathan drew in a sharp breath, his voice low but commanding. "Victoria, stop right now." The sound cut through the air like a blade. Victoria flinched and spun around. For the first time in months, she failed to mask the twisted fury on her face. Her eyes flicked toward Jonathan, then quickly steadied as she forced her expression back into calm. "When did you get home?" Her voice was stiff at first, then dropped into a false softness. She was the one being careless. She needs to learn to obey. If you keep spoiling her, she'll never grow up. Sophia let out a choking sob and clung to her father's chest. Tears streamed down her face, her voice breaking into fragments as she whispered as if terrified of making him angrier. "Daddy, it's my fault. I shouldn't have broken the cup. I promise, I'll be better. Just please, don't let Mommy hate me anymore." Jonathan held his daughter tight, his hand pressing gently on her small shoulder as if to shield her from the whole world. His eyes locked on Victoria, each word striking with heavy weight. "You call this teaching? Leaving her in pain like this? She's only 6 years old, Victoria." Victoria let out a bitter laugh, her tone dripping with resentment. "You always take her side. I'm the one who lives with her every day. I'm the one who deals with her spilling things, making messes. What is wrong if I discipline her? And me, Jonathan, I am your wife. Am I worth less than a child?" Jonathan's brow furrowed, his chest rising and falling sharply. In that moment, memories flooded back, his wife passing when Sophia was only 2, leaving behind an endless void. He had thought remarrying would give his daughter someone to lean on, would make the house less cold. But now, he saw he had made a terrible mistake. Victoria's words pierced Jonathan's heart like a blade. He clutched his daughter closer, his face darkening. Rage erupted, his voice booming through the living room. "Shut up, Victoria. You were never her mother. Her mother would never punish her just for breaking a cup and then ignore her wound." That voice froze the entire room. Victoria stood motionless for a few seconds, her eyes wide, then quickly shifted into a look of hatred. Sophia trembled, perhaps for the first time in years, feeling her father's arms like a solid wall of protection. The once quiet mansion now echoed only with Jonathan's heavy breathing, Sophia's muffled sobs, and Victoria's eyes flooding with uncontrollable fury. Victoria pressed her lips together, her hand tightening into a fist, and in her gaze flashed a cold, sharp light, the sign of another storm about to break. Jonathan closed the office door, his arms still holding Sophia tightly. He set her down on the sofa and pressed a clean cloth gently against the scratch. His body trembled, and his deep, husky voice came out like a promise. "Daddy is here now. No one will hurt you anymore." Sophia pressed her face into her father's shoulder, her small breaths trembling with every beat. For the first time, she clearly felt his protection. Yet in her tearful eyes, another fear still gnawed at her. Her voice was faint, words breaking with a sob. "Daddy, what can I do so that stepmom won't hate me anymore? Why is it that the harder I try, the further she pushes me away?" Jonathan froze, his chest tightening. His eyes welled with tears, not knowing how to answer. His large hand gently squeezed her small shoulder, only a heavy sigh breaking the silence. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Henry, come right away. Sophia is hurt." About 15 minutes later, Dr. Henry Walker arrived. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair who had been close to the Miller family for many years. Carrying a small medical bag, his eyes filled with concern when he saw Sophia draw her leg in, the red scratch marking her skin. "It's not serious, just a shallow cut. But she needs rest and, more importantly, emotional care." Jonathan nodded, his gaze shifting from his daughter to the hallway. Victoria's figure appeared, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Her face was cold, her eyes flashing with anger. Jonathan stepped out, closing the door behind him to let Henry work. He stood facing Victoria, his voice lowered but weighted with authority. "She is my last boundary. You've already crossed the line." Victoria curled her lips into a bitter smile. "Boundary? I'm only teaching her. You always defend that girl, always put her above me. You should be thanking me for correcting her, instead of treating me like the enemy." Jonathan looked straight into her eyes, his voice dropping, every word heavy. "That is not teaching. That is cruelty." Victoria burst out laughing, the hollow sound echoing down the hall. "Cruelty? No, Jonathan. You're just afraid of losing your little doll that you used to make up for your dead wife. You don't truly love her. You're only trying to ease your own guilt." Jonathan clenched his fists, veins standing out on the back of his hand. In his eyes, anger swelled like a wave. He no longer saw a wife before him, only a stranger filled with malice. He turned back into the room. Sophia was having her wound bandaged by Henry, her eyes wet with tears though she tried to stifle her sobs. Jonathan swallowed hard, his hand tightening, his voice ringing with finality. "Tomorrow, I will end this marriage with you. I will not let my daughter live with you another second. We will divorce, and you will leave this house. Do not appear before her again." The next morning, Jonathan's study was heavy with silence. On the wooden desk, the divorce papers were already laid out. Jonathan sat across from Victoria, pen in hand. He didn't speak much, only looked straight into the eyes of the woman who had shared his life for the past 5 months. Victoria crossed her arms, her face void of emotion, yet at the corner of her lips lingered a faint smile full of defiance. Jonathan finished signing and pushed the papers toward her. Victoria slowly wrote her name, then set the pen down. Her cold gaze drifted past him to Sophia, who was sitting quietly on the chair next to her father. Before leaving the house, Victoria bent down, her voice low but hissing with venom. "Did you think you escaped me, Jonathan? You'll see, I'm not so easy to get rid of. Both you and that little girl will pay for this." The door slammed shut, leaving behind an icy emptiness. Jonathan gently squeezed Sophia's shoulder, but even he could feel unease spreading inside him. That afternoon, when the sun had softened, a knock sounded at the door. Jonathan opened it and saw Eleanor Brooks, the woman who lived next door. She was about 55, thin, her graying hair neatly tied back, a small box of freshly baked cookies in her hands. Eleanor had been a longtime neighbor, usually gentle, rarely interfering in anyone's affairs. But today, her eyes carried an unusual resolve. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I brought some cookies for Sophia." Her voice was soft but hoarse, as if it had taken all her courage to speak. Jonathan invited her in. In the living room, Sophia sat curled up on the sofa, clutching a white teddy bear tightly in her arms. Seeing her like that made Eleanor's throat tighten, her eyes glistening. She walked slowly toward the child and set the cookie box on the table. "Sophia, I brought cookies. Would you like to try one?" Her voice trembled, though she tried to keep a gentle smile. Sophia looked up, her clear eyes filled with caution. She shook her head and hugged the stuffed bear tighter, as if afraid that if she let go, the only sense of safety she had would disappear. Eleanor turned to Jonathan, lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "Mr. Miller, I have to be honest. I've seen, many times, Victoria yelling at the little girl. Once she even made her kneel outside in the cold. I thought about reporting it to the authorities, but I was afraid I didn't have enough proof. I'm sorry for staying silent for so long." Jonathan froze, a sting rising in his nose. His face sank under the weight of guilt, realizing he had let his daughter endure loneliness and suffering far more than he had ever imagined. Sophia heard it, her small shoulders trembling. She lifted her head, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. though still hesitant. Her voice came out as soft as a breath. "Auntie, is it true you saw me being bad? Is that why Mom hates me?" Eleanor stopped short, tears filling her eyes. She sat down beside Sophia, took the child's tiny hand into her frail palms, and spoke with a trembling but steady voice. "No, sweetheart, you are a very good girl. The one who is wrong isn't you. It's the adult who treated you unfairly. You must remember, you deserve to be loved." Sophia looked at her, lips quivering, eyes shimmering with tears. She clutched the stuffed bear against her chest, and for the first time in many days, let a small smile appear, uncertain, but real. Jonathan sat across from them, quietly watching. He gave Eleanor a slight nod, thanking her with his eyes. Then he lowered his voice and admitted the fear that had been gnawing at him. "Thank you, but I'm afraid Victoria hasn't stopped yet." Eleanor stayed silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. In her eyes flashed a trace of fear, as though she sensed that somehow Victoria would find a way to return. That afternoon, when the Oak Ridge mansion had fallen silent again, after Victoria had quietly left, she did not return to her old home but instead rented a small apartment in a shabby neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Inside the narrow room, a dim yellow light cast shadows across her cold face. She wore a long black coat, sat upright, and her eyes carried both fury and calculation. The door creaked open. A large man with a scruffy beard and a wrinkled shirt stepped inside. It was Richard Hale, 40 years old, someone Victoria had once known through a gambling debt. He let out a mocking laugh, his voice rough and hoarse. "Out of money already, rich lady? You don't look any different from someone thrown out onto the street." Victoria clenched her teeth, forcing a smile, though the hatred in her eyes was clear. "You think I'm going to lose? Jonathan will be brought to his knees if Sophia disappears from his hands." Richard raised his eyebrows, sneering as if he had just heard a cheap joke. He pulled out a chair, dropped heavily into it, and leaned back. "You dare touch the girl? I thought all you knew how to do was parade around in that mansion." Before Victoria could respond, a knock echoed at the door. A woman walked in, her wavy brown hair cascading over her shoulders, lips painted a bold red, her gaze sharp though her voice dripped with sweetness. She was Melissa Grant, 35, a woman with a history tied to multiple financial fraud schemes. She sat down, crossed her legs, and spoke in a soft but calculating tone. "Why waste your breath arguing? I know how to make Jonathan open that safe without lifting a finger. The girl is the key. As long as we take her, Jonathan will pay whatever it takes." Victoria was silent for a moment, then nodded, her eyes flashing with malice. Richard slapped the table, chuckling darkly. "Fine, this sounds like fun. I'll handle the men. Melissa will do the planning, and you just need to play the role of the abandoned stepmother."